Good afternoon and welcome to this event where we're marking 20 years of the community and government taking action to protect children and young people. My name is Kate Quinn with CEASE, Center to End All Sexual Exploitation, and co-chair of the Sexual Exploitation Working Group. I'd like to welcome you all to Edmonton City Tower and thank the city staff team for hosting this event. You can't see it, but our beautiful City Hall is just behind us. I would like to respectfully recognize that we are meeting today on Treaty 6 land, the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples whose ancestors have marked this territory for centuries. This includes the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Inuit, and the Métis people of Métis Nation Zone 4. We're just concluding Métis Nation Awareness Week. All of us are dedicated to working together as Indigenous people and people of diverse communities from all over the world to heal past injustices and forge new pathways together. A couple of housekeeping points. If there should be a fire, just go down the escalator and run directly across the street. Washrooms much more likely to be needed. They are outside this meeting space down the hall, and there is a door code that is posted on the wall there or just as you leave. I need to tell everybody that we have a little challenge here today in that these microphones are for our webcast audience. This will also then be up on the Reach Edmonton and the Sexual Exploitation Working Group YouTube sites. The challenge is we have no sound in this room. So we have Hannah at the back who will be raising her thumb and has already raised it once for me. So it's going to be a challenge for myself and the panelists and Elder Gloria because we have softer voices. So please bear with us. We will do our best. It's my great honor to introduce Elder Gloria Laird. We first met in the years 1996 to 1998 when our province struck a task force to look at the impact on sexually exploited children. That task force led to the creation of Bill 1 and what we now call the PSECA legislation, and you will hear all about that shortly. Gloria was a strong advocate and remains a strong advocate. When Bill 1 was in its developmental stage, she was one of the people who said, "It's good that you consulted the First Nations chiefs, but we need to have the voices of urban Aboriginal people." And she helped lead the creation of the Bill 1 Aboriginal Working Group to ensure that those voices were heard. She is the elder working with youth at the Yellowhead Youth Center. And I would like to offer Gloria a little tobacco and invite her to begin with the blessing.
Yikes. Good morning, and Kate, thank you for that introduction. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm a little stuffed up, and I'll make an effort to speak louder, like I'm hollering at my granddaughters. I'll pretend they're out there. I just realizing it's been 20 years, wow, since Bill 1. I had been at a community meeting, and I worked for Children's Services as an Aboriginal consultant. And I was at a community meeting, and some of the people, our Indigenous people, were complaining that we were not being consulted, about this new law that was coming into effect, and that so many of our youth were impacted by it, and that we needed to have some say and some input. And then I was invited to sit on this Bill 1 working group as an Aboriginal person. And I went to the meeting, and then I stated to them that I can't come here and represent the people. I wasn't appointed to come and speak on behalf of the people. And we have a whole group of Aboriginal people that are waiting to take part. They want to hear, they want to participate. They're very concerned about all of our young people that are ending up on the streets. And I had had the experience of moving to Edmonton when I was 17, and many of those years when I worked a good part of my life. I'm still working. And a lot of times I would be walking to work, or I'd be going to meet somebody for lunch, and I was always stopped and asking me how much. And I was always asked, these cars would pull over and stop. There were several times where they rear-ended somebody trying to get me into their car. And it was a very embarrassing for me for most of my life. And I would ask my friends, do I look like I'm working on the streets the way I dress, or why is it? I didn't understand at that time, and as a young woman, that was how we were perceived, and that we were all for sale. And that was really difficult. And it bothered me, because what I've seen since then is how easy it is for our young ones to get exploited on the streets, and how easy it would have been for me to have gone down that path as well. And I would often think, there but the grace of God go I, just because of the attitudes and how we were treated. There was a lot of discrimination, and more obvious discrimination in those days, and there was just perceptions about us. And I feel so bad that we still have so many of our young people, and I work with some of these youth at PSH, and I pray with them, invite them to come out and pray, and that if they want to talk or they want to visit. And the really sad part is I've seen some of them when they were quite young in one of the other houses. They leave, and then they end up, several of them have ended up in the protective safe house. And I find that cycle so disturbing. But I pray a lot. I pray every day, and I always pray for the young ones on the street as well, our boys and our girls, and our women too, that sometimes feel like they don't have a choice. And I can understand where they're coming from, because it's very difficult without an education for many of these women that have families. So I'm sharing all of this. I'm just kind of shocked. It's been 20 years since that bill was proclaimed, and I really want to honor all of you and the panel for working so tirelessly in this whole field of sexual exploitation. And I understand it's worldwide and getting worse. I always read the articles as I see them, and it's kind of heartbreaking, because so many of these children are so young and they get picked up off the street. So I'd ask you to join me in prayer. Down south, when they pray, they tell you to sit down. And up north here, and I'm Métis, we ask you to stand. And I would ask you to join me in prayer. Pray however you pray, however you're comfortable to pray. I was honored with this tobacco, and the tobacco will be put out, but I find it's very powerful, and when we use with the tobacco, and then we give it to the land and to the Creator, to the grandmothers and grandfathers, and ask them to hear our prayers. and the prayers that were put into this tobacco. So just pray with me that however you pray. Creator, we give thanks and gratitude for life. I give thanks for this gathering here today and be honored to pray. We ask your blessings, especially for all the people in this Treaty 6 area, and acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 land, but also the land of the Métis, and honor all our Métis and First Nations ancestors that look after this land, and we give gratitude. We ask your blessings for everyone here, for all those they love and care about, and especially for the work that they're doing, that they'll get more and more support, and that we're able to help more of our people that end up on the streets. We ask for everyone to be kept safe. I call on the Archangel Michael to keep those on the streets safe, to watch over them. We pray for all the families as well of all the missing and murdered Indigenous women and non-Indigenous. There are many that have ended up lost, and people don't know where their families, or the family members don't know where they enter, Creator. So grandmothers and grandfathers, we're asking for blessings for this as well. We give gratitude for the food that's provided to us today, and for all the working group here today in the panel, that we're all able to come together with open hearts and open minds, and in a way that new energies are opened up to help all those that are exploited, and to support them and send them the message to know that they are loved. We give thanks. We ask, may we be filled, surrounded, protected by the pure golden light of the Christ. May all that is good enter, may all else return to the nothingness from which it came. For this we give thanks. Hi, kanaskum tenawa. Thank you all. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Elder Gloria. Now I'd like to welcome Councillor Scott McKean. Scott has been a champion over the last number of years to help our city take action on mental health and isolation, on homelessness, on some of those root causes that contribute to sexual exploitation. I know he has a special heart for people, and I would like to invite him. He's an agent of change in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Elder. I really appreciate. I often think that when I have the privilege to hear an elder speak, it reminds me that time slows down when an elder speaks, and it grounds me in the issue that we're dealing with. It's fast-paced over at City Council. We deal with sometimes dozens of issues in a week. And this one hasn't come before us for a while, but it will again. I know it will. And we have plans to make things better, but what a complex issue. And I also want to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 land. I also wanted to acknowledge the work of the police service on this issue, very complex legal issue. I wanted to acknowledge everybody who works in agencies, the social workers and others who work on this. And I wanted to acknowledge Kate Quinn, who has devoted much of her life dealing with sexual exploitation, and I'm sure going home at night thinking, I wish I didn't know that story, that story's not going to make me comfortable tonight. So there's, I used to write in the Edmonton Journal, and I remember writing more than once that about those of us who are blessed to not see through the other side of the curtain. And so many of you in this room are challenged with seeing through the other side of the curtain and what really goes on in our city, behind the scenes, in dark alleys, in anonymous buildings. And I just want to thank you. Well, it's unfortunate we're gathered here today because of child exploitation exists in our city. Events like this are an important opportunity to draw attention to this serious issue so we can learn, discuss, and work together to hopefully put an end to it. Since the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children Act was brought into effect 20 years ago, we've seen some progress in the way that communities can support young people in getting out of sexual exploitation. There have been many hard lessons learned along the way, and there is still much more to be done to keep vulnerable young people free from harm. The City of Edmonton is committed to working with partner organizations and individuals to support the well-being of all children and youth in our community. For more than 15 years, the Sexual Exploitation Working Group has offered leadership in this critical area, helping to raise awareness of and combat exploitive practices. Each spring, I'm going to lose that shawl there. Sorry, Kate. Each spring, the working group organizes a Sexual Exploitation Week of Awareness, which offers community and educational sessions. These informative sessions are an important way to come together as a community and support individuals and families who have been affected by sexual exploitation. So again, I'd like to thank the Sexual Exploitation Working Group and REACH as well. Didn't mention REACH earlier, I should have, for all you do to prevent exploitation in our city. Working together, we are making Edmonton a healthier, safer place to call home. Thank you so much.
Oops. Thanks, Councillor McKean. And you may wonder why we have this orange shawl, and some of us are wearing orange. It's because the Sexual Exploitation Working Group chose orange, a color that brings together the fiery red of anger at injustice and merges us with the yellow, the warmth of compassion and love, and every shade of orange in between. It was chosen by some of the international human trafficking movements, and in 2013, our country set aside Orange Shirt Day to remember all the children who were taken into residential schools and the ensuing intergenerational trauma that was a result. And so we at SEWG kind of stand in solidarity with all those who are longing and working for healing and freedom. I'd like now to call upon Staff Sergeant Colin Hewen with the Edmonton Police Service Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit. We thought it might be helpful to understand some of the big picture of some of the laws that are at play as we talk about creating protection for children and youth. So, Staff Sergeant Colin Hewen.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Fairly monumental task to talk about the laws around human trafficking when I've been given 5 minutes to do it. It's basically an impossibility. Just like the councillor said, it's a very complex issue, and the laws around it are equally as complex. So I'm not going to give you the law talk on this 5 minutes that I have, but we're going to talk about a bit of an overview of just what we're seeing, what's happening, what are some definitions that we're talking about so that we're all on the same page about this issue of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. When we say the words human trafficking, people often have this preconceived notion or biases around what that is. Some people, maybe not in this room, but family members or friends that we have where we're talking about these things may have the imagery around chains and ropes, locked in a basement, put in a shipping crate. This is not exactly what human trafficking is. Not to say it doesn't happen in places around the world. It does, but primarily here in Canada, statistics state that human trafficking, 90% of those involved in human trafficking is within our own borders. It's not the binding or the importation of people coming from countries like Thailand or Cambodia or whatnot. 90% is domestic and happening and women are being recruited within our own borders. So what is human trafficking then? Essentially, we're talking about controlling an individual for the purposes of repeatedly selling them for their services. The services can be sexual or physical labor in nature. The laws where we find this contrary to can be found within our criminal code and in Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, more on the labor trafficking side. Today we're going to be focusing on, obviously, the sexual exploitation piece, but I just wanted to mention that other side that sometimes we forget about. Oftentimes, human trafficking is known as modern-day slavery. When we start using words such as slavery, we start getting a different picture of what we're talking about. The big word that we're talking about here is control. Who has control? Who has the control over what they want to do with their bodies? When we start talking about that word control, we can start wrapping our heads around what it is to be controlled or how someone is controlling someone else. That's where the law piece comes in, and it's all stemming around that one strong word. It's not about two consenting adults necessarily. Human trafficking can involve the recruitment, transportation, harboring, exercising control, direction or influence in the movements of a person in order to exploit that person either sexually or through forced labor. That's human trafficking. Doesn't mean the person has to be moved around. It doesn't say it needs to be moved or transported. It's a component that has the word or written in it, or recruited, or harbored, or held. You don't need to be transported for it. And that's the misconception that a lot of us have around this human trafficking because of the word trafficking. Movement's not necessary. The United Nations Protocol, which is widely referenced to talk about human trafficking, essentially breaks it down into three pieces: action, means, purpose. A lot of people in this room have heard those terms before. The action requires the doing of something. What's happening? Is it a recruitment? Is it harboring? Is there transportation or transfer between people? How are they doing it? What are the means? Is it through threats, abduction, coercion, deception, being lied to, being sold a story that they're not living up to? And then what's the purpose of those pieces? Is it for forced labor? Is it for servitude? Is it for sexual exploitation or slavery? So what is exploitation then? Defined in the dictionary, exploitation is the use or utilization, especially for profit. Our criminal code has a definition, and I'm here for the law piece because I'm a policeman and I get deferred those topics. Thank you, Kate. Our criminal code essentially says a person exploits another person if through the course they provide a service when they believe their safety is threatened through force or threats of force, through deception, or through abuse of a position of trust. They feel they have to do it or else bad things are going to happen. That's that control piece and the use of potential violence or other means to get them to do that. So let's break it down just in simplistic terms here. The crime, without getting into the code, the crime can be satisfied if a person recruits through exercise of control for the purpose of sexual exploitation. That's human trafficking. We don't need to overthink this into something that is greater than. It's quite simplistic in its terms. We just need to be on the right track as far as what are we defining human trafficking. And today we're talking about the PSECA, mostly child sex trafficking. Let it be known that most of the offenses in the criminal code that deal with human trafficking or exploitation or commodification of sex, when there's a youth involved, the criminal code recognizes that the punishment should be more severe when a child is involved. So what's the police doing about it? Well, we have a mandate. The Edmonton Police Service Human Trafficking Exploitation Unit is dedicated to the prevention, detection, disruption, and dismantling of human trafficking and exploitation activity through coordinated, efficient, and effective investigations, that's the police piece, in a victim-centered manner. Our mission actually underlines and bolds victim-centered. That's a piece that we need to keep focused on. Victim-centered manner, working collaboratively with victim support service providers, government and non-governmental organizations, and other enforcement agencies. We, the police, are not going to wrest our way out of this problem. We got to work together to tackle this massive issue. What we're seeing here today and what we're seeing with our sexual exploitation working group is a demonstration of this collaboration. So thank you for being a part of this, and we'll move on to the next.
And now we're going to move into a fuller explanation of the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children Act. We're going to look a little bit at the history and then where we are today through our panelists. Some of what you may hear may be triggering, and we are thankful to our two Sexual Assault Center staff who are sitting in the middle there. Maybe if you could raise your hands. If anyone wants to leave, we've arranged for a quiet room, and one of them will go with you. So we just wanted to make that support available. I'd like to now call upon Mary Peltier-Martinello. She is the casework supervisor for the PSECA team in this region. Mary.
Welcome and good afternoon. It is my pleasure today to be the historian. I, like Gloria and Kate, have been involved with the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act for a great number of years, at least the full 20. I wanted to provide you with an overview, a historical overview, which really sets the stage to the present day work that we do with this very complex, vulnerable population. So it all began in 1996 when the government established a task force to look into the specific circumstances and social issues regarding child sexual exploitation. And I want to acknowledge a Calgary MLA who later went on to be one of our ministers in the early 2000s, because Heather Forsyth was really instrumental in the initial act, the PCHIP Act, and was a force behind really changing our views as a society about child exploitation. So in 1996, there was a series of public representatives on a task force. There were public members, schools, police, community agencies, justice, and children's services. So through this consultation of a year, in 1997, a report was developed, and one of the strong recommendations of that report was that there be specific legislation to protect children involved in prostitution. And on February 1st, 1999, the Protection of Children Involved in Prostitution Act, formerly known as PCHIP, was proclaimed. You need to know that that is extremely groundbreaking and progressive, forward-thinking legislation. It was the first then of its kind worldwide, and it made a significant change in how society viewed sexually exploited children, clearly recognizing for the first time that children involved in sexual exploitation are victims of child sexual abuse. Alberta continues to be the only province in Canada that has specific legislation, so I am extremely proud of that. And it acknowledges the requiring and protection of specialized services. Previously to 1999 and the enactment of the PCHIP legislation, there was a common belief that child sexual exploitation was a choice, a lifestyle choice. Children were often charged in a punitive justice system and charged with solicitation. And I know Kate, through her work at SEWG, continues to deal with former sex trade workers that are dealing specifically with previous solicitation charges. Some of the guiding early principles and continued principles are that sexually exploited children are victims of child sexual abuse. Children have the right to physical, emotional safety, security, and well-being. They have the right to be safe from sexual abuse and protected from sexual exploitation. They require victim protection, service, and support. Families should be actively involved. Families and children do not require child intervention status. That was previously required under the old Child Welfare Act. And most importantly, that perpetrators of child sexual abuse, the offenders and the exploiters, must be held accountable. And Colin spoke to that. So, in 1999 till 2001, there were some amendment changes. This could get rather dry. However, initially, children were confined to a protective safe house up to 72 hours. In 2001, we increased that confinement to a period of 5 days to provide better assessment and emergency care for the children we were serving. Also, in 2001, 16 and 17-year-olds were allowed to enter into voluntary service agreements without guardian or parental consent, acknowledging an independent and ability to make some choices for themselves. And furthermore, rights to protection of these children were established through a legal process, that they were to be informed in writing when and why they were confined, the duration of their confinement, what the court dates would be, and their right to legal representation. In 2007, there was an amendment to the PSECA legislation, and is what is now known as the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act. There was a lot of community and parental and victims acknowledging that the label and stigma of the word prostitution was preventing them from coming forward and getting services under the PSECA legislation. So the removal of the word prostitution was taken out of the act, and it currently stands as the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act. The name change also reflected the true nature of the abuse that sexually exploited children and youth experience, and it was also at that time in line with internationally recognized language and understanding of sexual abuse. Another change in 2007 was that youth could be served up to the age of 22, and then a further change and a current service to children and young adults that are up to age 24 if they had previous involvement prior to their 18th birthday. There has been a lot of program growth over the last 20 years, and I'm very proud to have been an integral part of that. Basically, from 1999 to 2015, there were 2 PSECA workers. However, with the increase in youth volume and the complexity and the layers of childhood trauma, in 2015, we dedicated 1 position to an intake assessor role, and in that same year, we added an additional caseworker generalist to meet some of those increasing complexities. One major trend initially that changed over the years was that street sexual exploitation was extremely visible in the early days on the street corners of some of the areas in the inner city. That leveled off, and to date, with the increase in technology and the explosion of the internet, we are faced with increasing complexities in working with these youth because they go dark through Facebook, dating apps, and internet luring. So that is one of the increasing challenges. We have youth that will exchange nude images of themselves, and therefore those images are distributed on the internet, which leads to child pornography. Some of the increasing complexities and complicating factors of working with this very vulnerable sector is mental health and earlyhood trauma, alcohol and drug addiction issues, gang involvement or affiliation, a lack of family and community connection. Therefore, they are quite entrenched in their street life and come to be quite entrenched with their street family and that affiliation. So those are just some of the continually adapting issues that we have to address in an increasing volume of youth. And it is my pleasure to introduce my collaborative team, the collaborative PSECA team, who work with this highly vulnerable population of often underreported sexual exploitation within the community of Edmonton. So we take a very collaborative team approach, and I will leave how that is done with my team and my panel here. And it's my pleasure to introduce Andrea Luby, who is my PSECA intake worker, Kaylee Graham is my case manager, PSECA generalist. I have one of 3 community follow-up workers, Julie Walker, who is from Métis Child and Family Services, and I have Detective Brian McGuigan, who is from Edmonton Police Services, Human Trafficking Sexual Exploitation Unit, and they are going to provide an overview of the collaboration and role definition of what they do on a daily basis to provide protective and supportive services to sexually exploited youth. Take it away, Andrea.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I work with the PSECA unit in Edmonton. In the spirit of complete transparency, I'd like to let you know I'm not here today because I'm the most eloquent speaker or the most competent staff on our unit, but rather because I drew a short stick. And if anyone knows Mary, she can be quite convincing when she puts her mind to something. That said, I'm really proud to be representing my teammates. Alana and Roxanne are here in the audience with us today, and they'll be part of the breakout sessions. And Kaylee's on the stage with me, and Mary's our supervisor. I'd like to tell you that there's going to be a bit of a light show and a dance opportunity. Alana and Roxanne have been practicing, but apparently the smoke machine is broken, so this is what you get. I'll try to keep it interesting, but it can be a bit dry, so I apologize in advance. So some of the work we do is really straightforward. However, some of the processes and parts of the legislation can be a bit more complex. So in discussing the best way to share this information with you today, we thought that I'd try to give a brief, I really hope it will be brief, overview of the work we do every day and how we put the legislation into practice. And then with our panel, we could try to take you through a kind of a case study of a typical, although I have to tell you there is no such thing as typical in the world of exploitation. So a typical client and how we work with our partners. So we receive lots of referrals related to worries for sexual exploitation from all sectors of the community. That could be from the police, schools, medical practitioners, mental health and addictions professionals, caseworkers from children's services, parents, and even sometimes other youth. When we receive a referral, we make a decision if the report meets the criteria under the legislation. So for the purposes of our legislation, is the young person under the age of 18 initially? And is the youth attempting to engage in or engaging in the exchange of sex acts for food, drugs, money, gifts, alcohol, a place to stay, and unfortunately the list goes on and on. If the young person meets this criteria, we can complete an intake, which sounds as exciting as it is, and open a file. During this time, we're going to be consulting with our collaterals, our supervisor, our manager, who's here today, hi Christine, and the guardian of the youth to assess if the young person is at imminent risk and requires more intrusive measures, or if we can ensure the young person is safe in the community. At this point, a decision may be made that the initial referral information does not substantiate meeting with the young person or moving forward to an assessment. If so, we can sometimes close that file at intake, and we've never even met with the young person face-to-face because we don't have the information we need. If the information is substantiated and it is appropriate to interview the young person, we would complete that and obtain their perspective of the concerns, ascertain the current risk of exploitation, the extent of the exploitation, the availability of supports, underlying issues related to exploitation, developing safety plans, and integral to the process is developing a rapport with our client in a non-judgmental manner. That's why it takes so long, because we have to do all that stuff. So if you're wondering what we do all day. Throughout the intake and assessment process, the generalist, so that's what they call us, is consulting with our supervisor, other supports, as well as the guardian, and with the young person themselves to determine if they can remain safe in the community and if an ongoing PSECA file is appropriate. If the young person is in need of services to decrease the risk of possible exploitation, and this is determined to be sufficient to ensure their safety in the community, supports can be offered to the youth through what we call a voluntary service agreement. And we'll call that a VSA, just to keep things easier. As the title suggests, this would require that the young person is voluntary and agreeable to supports. If the initial information we obtain is indicative that the young person is at imminent risk, so it could be that the young person is actually engaging in exploitation at that time, or attempting to, the generalist would consult with their supervisor, manager, guardian, and collaterals to determine to move forward by possibly requesting an order through the courts. At times, if the young person is unsafe in the moment, an immediate intervention is required. So for instance, the young person might flee. A manager can approve an emergency apprehension without a court order. So, as it kind of sounds like, the young person can be apprehended without their consent and placed in a locked facility. So we call that PSH. It's the Protective Safe House. It's the YYC complex. It's important to note that when we use the word apprehension, we're referring to placing the youth in the protective safe house, but it doesn't reflect any change in guardianship. So the parent, if they are the guardian at that time, would continue to be the guardian. As Mary mentioned before, regardless of which process is completed, the young person has access to legal counsel, and that would be through the legal representation for children and youth. And the matter must be heard before a judge within a maximum of 5 days' time. So we're held accountable by the courts. We don't make decisions willy-nilly. So hold on, this is where it gets really interesting because I'm going to talk about timelines. So get excited. So the initial apprehension and placement at the Protective Safe House allows the PSECA generalist time to gather information about the young person's safety, to meet with the young person to discuss worries about exploitation and safety planning, and to obtain some input from the young person's guardians, supports, and community partners. A decision is made by the generalist and the supervisor if a request for a further period of confinement will be made before the courts. And a request can be made for up to a maximum of 21 days. Of importance for a lot of people is that the final decision is made by a judge, and that judge can determine the amount of days or even to release the young person. At the end of that confinement period, and again, we're always consulting. That's what we do all the time with Mary and our collaborative people. And with the youth, the supports, the staff at the Protective Safe House, and their guardian, we would make another decision to possibly go to the courts and request another period of confinement, and that order could be for up to 21 days. So in total, the maximum time that the legislation allows for a young person to be confined from the time of an apprehension and with subsequent court orders would be 47 days. Once the days of confinement have expired, the young person is usually offered voluntary supports through PSECA. However, again, that word voluntary, the young person can refuse services. And unless there's enough evidence of imminent risk through sexual exploitation, the legislation does not allow for further intervention outside of those voluntary supports. So the majority of young people we do work with is through a voluntary basis. So it's surprising to a lot of people that even though initially they're pretty reluctant to be placed in a protective safe house, that actually most of the young people we work with want to work with us voluntarily following that. Our contact with our clients is really fluid, and we can move from voluntary to non-voluntary and back again many times throughout the life of a file. As a unit, we work from a harm reduction model. So related to the risk factors that contribute to sexual exploitation, such as addictions, youth being absent from their placement, etc. And given that our role is only a small piece of our clients' lives, our focus is on collaborating with the youth supports or assisting the youth to develop a safety network. To that end, we meet bi-weekly with our core team. That includes EPS and the Human Trafficking Sexual Exploitation Unit, an addictions counselor through Alberta Health Services, and our community follow-up workers to kind of get to talk about files and make sure we're doing everything we can for the young people we work with. As Mary mentioned before, a typical client, again, I hate the word typical, but has a history of trauma, often child sexual or physical abuse or neglect, multiple placements during childhood, physical sexual assault, things like that. and may currently be struggling with addictions and/or mental health issues and a lack of stable housing. Often these issues can lead youth to come into conflict with the law. We are therefore attempting to collaborate with the young person's guardian and caregivers, their mental health supports, probation officers and police, addictions counselors, and even peers or non-familial supports. So, as promised, things are going to get good. So we were going to talk a little bit about a case study to kind of help, because it can be a bit confusing as to who does what where, and when we go from voluntary to non-voluntary. So we thought we would start with a case study, which is of nobody in particular, but kind of a combination of everybody. So hopefully this makes it a bit easier to understand. So we're going to talk about a young person who is 16 years old and a female. And on this particular call today, we're going to say we got a call from PCHAD. I don't know if everyone's familiar with PCHAD. It's the Protection of Children Abusing Drugs. It's run through Alberta Health Services, and it's a locked facility for young people who struggle with addictions. So the young person was confined at PCHAD, and we got a phone call from the staff there who reported concerns that the youth had advised she had been staying in hotels with her drug dealer, and her parents were concerned that she may be engaging in exploitation to obtain drugs and to meet her basic needs. Staff also reported another youth in the program had approached the young person to engage in exploitation. After a conversation with the young person's guardian and staff at PCHAD, a face-to-face meeting occurred with the young person. The young person denied engaging in exploitation, but was open to a discussion about the risks of exploitation and why her supports were concerned that she could be at risk of engaging in this activity. She refused voluntary supports, but indicated that she was aware of the program and would be willing to contact the worker if she had worries about exploitation in the future. So in consultation with the supervisor, a decision was made to close the file at intake as the young person was not wanting voluntary supports, and there wasn't enough information to request a court order. Parents were advised and aware to contact us if further issues occurred. Several months later, a call was received from the youth placement as they believed the young person was engaging in exploitation. They reported that the young person was leaving the program in different vehicles with unknown people, returning with money, had her hair extensions and nails done, and she also had a new phone and new clothing. Staff provided a cell phone number that the youth was currently using. PSECA staff were able to locate advertisements online for the purposes of exchanging sex acts for money that were connected with the youth's phone number and featured photos of the youth. At this time, we contact our friends at EPS Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit and provide them with information related to the ads. So I'm going to turn it over to our friend Detective McGuigan to give you an idea of kind of what they would do at that point when they get the information from us.
So there's 4 detectives in the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit. So whenever Andrea sends an email, she sends it to all of us, and then there's usually a bit of juggling to see who's actually going to reply. Because it usually means that there's going to be a couple of days of work involved. Is that better? No? More? Okay. So when Andrea sends an email to our unit, we know that it's going to be something that is going to have to take priority, because if she's identified something, or one of her team have identified a child that's in need of intervention, it's an issue that our unit have to take up straight away. So if Andrea gives us a telephone number or an ad with an ad number that's online at that moment, what I did in this instance was, through a covert cell phone that I have in the office, I started to have a text conversation with whoever is answering that telephone number. Through experience, we know that, especially with youth, if they're advertising online, there's usually an adult in and around that youth who's actually communicating with prospective clients to come and engage in obtaining sexual services. Over the next day and a half, I continued a text conversation where I arranged to have sexual services from whoever was answering that telephone. Through that conversation, a price was arranged and a place to meet, which was a Southside motel. Myself and a colleague attended that motel, continuing the text conversation to make sure that the person answering the phone was still there. Once we arrived, we were directed to one of the hotel rooms, and on the door being answered by a young female, I identified myself as a police officer, and through investigations confirmed her identity, and then contacted Andrea with the result, basically apprehending her under the PSECA apprehension order and then taking her to crisis unit.
So then the next kind of stage would be, we've apprehended that person, Brian's helped us out, and then the next stage would be clearly they're transported to our protective safe house, and that's when Kaylee can talk a little bit about the services and supports that are offered there, along with Julie.
Hello. The Protective Safe House, or you'll hear us call it PSH because we love our acronyms, is a secure facility in which we can place young people who have direct evidence that they are engaging in exchanging sex acts for something. I think it is. It's red. Okay. So they're exchanging sex acts for something, whether that be money, drugs, or a place to stay, something like that. This part of the PSECA program is non-voluntary, as Andrea mentioned before. PSH can receive youth who have been mandated by the courts using the PSECA legislature 24/7. The facility has 5 specific provincial PSECA beds available. While youth are in care at the Protective Safe House, the focus of treatment is safety and stability. Youth are offered a safe environment removed from their immediate harms. During their stay at PSH, youth receive legal advice from LRCY, medical attention from an on-site nurse as well as an Alberta Health Services community nurse, access to psychiatry, and there is a pediatrician there as well. Furthermore, youth are provided with a psychologist-led program weekly and access to Alberta Health Services addiction counselors. The Child and Youth Care Counselor staff provide psychoeducational groups on topics such as human trafficking, internet safety, addictions, and self-regulation techniques. The community follow-up workers, who is Julie, and we have 2 other ones, Emma, who is through Catholic Social Services, and Chelsea, who also works with Julie at Métis Child and Family Services. So the community follow-up workers provide weekly connection groups and sharing circles while the youth are placed in PSH. The youth have the opportunity to connect and register with the Care Proactive team, and they also have access to Indigenous Culture Resource Advisor to provide cultural and spiritual supports. During the youth's confinement at PSH, youth are registered in on-site schooling, and they have the ability to participate in various recreational activities on-site, such as swimming, crafts, baking, on-site unit yoga, and gym sports. While youth are at the PSH, the Child and Youth Care Counselors utilize trauma-informed practice to empower the youth and build upon the youth's pre-existing strengths in hopes to provide the youth with strategies for safety and access to healthy supports in the community, all while supporting the youth throughout the confinement process. The PSECA workers often will meet the youth regularly while they are placed in PSH to either repair or maintain the relationship with the youth we work at. As Andrea mentioned, they typically aren't very happy to be there. We do this in the hopes that the youth will want to work with us under voluntary supports upon their discharge from the Protective Safe House.
So say our young lady has been there for her 47 days and she is done the end of her confinement and says, you know what, I'm fine, I don't need your supports. Maybe she's utilizing addiction supports in the community, has found a safe place to stay. At that point, our work with the young person ends because it's no longer voluntary. However, for the kind of to let you know how it works, this old fluid kind of movement, say I get a call 2 weeks later from her placement, and the placement has said, we have some concerns about her, things aren't going well. At the same time, I went off track there. I did it wrong, I did it wrong. So at the same time, they get an anonymous call at EPS, as they sometimes do, to have a report about this young person. So if you want to talk a little bit about kind of...
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that once, as investigators, once we hand over that child to this wonderful team, we don't just forget about her. We'll obviously do a criminal investigation into whoever's been involved in her exploitation too. So we still have an interest there to gather information from that child, and we will quite often interview them within the protective safe house to gather information if they are willing to talk to us. With that ongoing investigation, we look for Crime Stoppers tips. We look for any intelligence that we can use to further our investigation. On this one instance, we did get a Crime Stoppers tip saying that the same female was continuing to engage in sexual exploitation. And again, we made, with a different phone number this time, so she wouldn't remember us, made a second date and then located her at a separate hotel where we conducted an emergency PSECA apprehension there.
So we're always in contact with the police. They're really good about letting us know that they may have a young person that they are concerned about, and there may be a need for an apprehension. So at that point, something like that would be an emergency. We would do that right away. They'd be apprehended and placed at the protective safe house. And like Brian said, sometimes the young people aren't willing to kind of share information about the person who may be involved in exploiting them because they feel that that's a relationship. But sometimes, with all the supports around them, they are willing to have those conversations with the police that can lead to more, to criminal charges, not clearly of the young person, but of the person who is exploiting them. So say our second go around, our young person's at the protective safe house and acknowledges, yeah, I need some help. I might actually be interested in some voluntary supports in the community, wants to sign an agreement. And at that point, once again, Kaylee would maybe talk a little bit about some of the things she would do with the young person in the community or things we have to offer them in the community, and Julie as well.
So Andrea's kind of gone through what the intake and assessment process looks like. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the ongoing phase of our program looks like. So after it's determined that the young person meets the criteria and would like to utilize PSECA supports under a voluntary service agreement, then the file is then assigned to one of the generalists for ongoing case management. Our first goal is typically focused on building the relationship with the young person. Because we are a voluntary program, we find that establishing that healthy, supportive relationship with our youth is integral to being able to work effectively with the young people we serve. While working with the young person under a voluntary service agreement, we can offer a variety of different supports, and we work collaboratively with a number of different community agencies to support the young people. The PSECA unit has a partnership with an addictions counselor through Alberta Health Services. The youth that we are connected with have the opportunity to be connected to a community follow-up worker, which, as I've mentioned, we have 2 partnerships through Métis Child and Family Services and 1 partnership through Catholic Social Services. And I'll let Julie kind of go into that, what her role entails in detail in a little bit. We also have a partnership with the Edmonton Police Services Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit, and we are in constant communication with our partners to chat about our files and keep everyone in the loop as to what's going on. Typically, most of the youth that we work with have dual status. And what this means is that they have an open intervention file with Children's Services. So we, as the PSECA worker, work very closely with the intervention team as well in order to make sure that we are trying to create safety and stability for the young people we support. That being said, not all PSECA youth have intervention status. The PSECA program is heavily client-driven in the sense that we work on goals that the youth has identified that they need support in achieving. This could be anything from helping them meet their basic needs, finishing up schooling, accessing mental health and addiction supports, attending court processes, addressing medical needs, or assisting them to make the transition from child to adult supports. The bottom line in regards to safety goals for the PSECA program is that our young people are not to be engaging in sexual exploitation. We are able to offer supports to young people in our program up until the age of 24. Andrea has touched base on some of those supports we utilize. And so in a few minutes, I'm just going to let Julie kind of take over and explain her role as a community follow-up worker, and then I have a couple more program areas that I'm going to talk about.
Thank you. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to keep it really short and sweet. Like they've said, I'm Julie Walker. I work for Métis Child and Family Services as one of the community follow-up workers. It's our role to provide intensive, continuous support in an outreach capacity. It's our intent is to connect with our youth, to be a constant in their life as they work on their goals. We work from a harm reduction model, and we do a lot of crisis intervention, as you can imagine. So our days can be quite different, which is part of the reason why I like the job so much. I'm not tied to a desk 9 to 5. And depending on how stable our kids are and what really their goals are, that's what we help them to work on.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm just going to go into a couple of other programs that we utilize quite frequently. So I touched a little bit on the fact that we have a partnership with Alberta Health Services. So we actually have an addictions counselor that is attached to our program, Jen Tokar, who unfortunately could not be here today. So we work in partnership with Jen. She meets our youth both while they're confined in the protective safe house as well as out in the community to focus on addiction counseling. So Jen is able to make referrals for detox programs and treatment programs as well as to connect the youth to any supports through Alberta Health Services that the service team and the youth find might be beneficial to them. The last program that I'm going to talk about is one that is fairly new. So it is our newest program, and it's called Mountain Sage, and it is also located out at the YYC complex. Mountain Sage is a program, it's a voluntary placement for youth with PSECA involvement. The youth who choose to go there have identified that they're ready to make some changes and are provided access to the intensive treatment program at the Yellowhead Youth Center. Treatment at Mountain Sage is client-specific, designed to both meet their individual needs as well as provide safety, structure, routine, and stability into the daily living of the young person. The youth are enrolled in on-site schooling, and if they're able to do so, they are able to work with a school transition worker to integrate into an appropriate community-based school. The youth are provided access to the same medical supports as the youth when they are in the protective safe house, and additionally informed and supported in attending community resources such as free STI clinics, addiction, and mental health supports. Youth are encouraged to attend community support groups for addictions if this is also an area youth identified for personal growth goal development. The youth have the opportunity to speak with an on-site psychologist who will provide the youth with individual support and family sessions. They can also participate in a variety of recreational opportunities both on and off the campus. The child and youth care counselors provide a trauma-informed harm reduction approach to treatment while ensuring the safety and treatment aspirations of all clients being recognized. The youth are to participate in many psychoeducational groups to discuss various topics around their goal development. Treatment is to be approximately 3 to 6 months in duration, with transition planning for the youth's next steps to be co-occurring.
So that's kind of the road that our youngsters sometimes follow. So sorry, we took a little bit more time than we were supposed to, but I think I speak for our whole team that this could have seemed a little bit dry, so we apologize. But we really enjoy our jobs, and we're really passionate about the work that we do. And we work with some of the most amazing, smart, savvy young people, and we're just really proud of them, and I'm proud to be able to be parts of their lives that lots of other people don't get to be there. So even when we're getting yelled at and called names, we're at least there. So thank you very much, and thanks, Kate.
Well, thanks to this incredible team, and again, thanks to all the teams throughout these 20 years for that continued presence, building of relationships, advocacy, and the changes that we've worked through in the legislation to ensure that it is responsive to the youth, protects their rights, and also protects them from those who would harm them. So what we're going to do now is this. I would like to just briefly introduce our sexual exploitation working group members, some of whom are here today. ACT Alberta, Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society, CEASE, the City of Edmonton, Edmonton Area Child and Family Services, Protection of Sexually Exploited Children ACT team, the Edmonton Police Service, Human Trafficking and Exploitation, Edmonton Fetal Alcohol Network, REACH Edmonton, Council of Safe Communities, Sexual Assault Centre of Edmonton, the Family Centre, and Alberta Status of Women Multiculturalism Ministry. And I'd like to bring a special awareness that the Status of Women is going to be leading awareness around the UN Days of Activism, 16 Days of Activism to End Violence Against Women. So watch for social media and other activities. There's also going to be a film screening about the female genital mutilation called In the Name of Our Daughters. That's coming up next week. So I know you probably have many questions. What we're going to do is we're going to end the webcast now, and we're going to break, and we're going to move into set up a few tables where you could have a chance to talk with the PSECA team or talk with the Sexual Assault Center team or the Status of Women or CEASE. It'll take us a few minutes to get the room rearranged, so if you'd like to take any kind of break or help yourself to more food, that would be great. And then just a few of us are going to move chairs and put tables out and set this up so that you can pursue more questions and dialogue. So thank you very much for coming. This concludes the end of our Pathways series. Thanks very much. Okay. So